Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. This week we are looking at the Psycho franchise, which currently consists of 4 films, a remake, a spin-off, and a TV show. But what came first was the Hitchcock classic. It changed the face of cinema in many ways and has created a legacy and influence that is still being felt today. Not least with our very own Calvin, who cites Psycho as his favourite film. Paging Dr. Freud. This episode contains spoilers for Psycho, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, Bates Motel, the 1987 TV movie, Psycho 4, The Beginning, Psycho, the 1998 remake, and then there are some very minor spoilers for the Bates Motel TV series that is still running, but not too much because we're actually not up to date with it. Enjoy!
Hi and welcome to the show. I'm Calvin and with me are Saul.
Hello.
And Alan.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about the Psycho film series. It was my decision to do this for this episode, partly to tie in with the final season of Bates Motel, which is a show that's been running on the A&E network.
We haven't mentioned on the show, really. We haven't really done any Hitchcock stuff, but we haven't really got into it any detail, but you're like a massive Hitchcock fan, aren't you, Calvin?
Oh, huge, yes.
Yeah.
And Psycho is it's like where the Venn diagram for your personal tastes meets, isn't it? Because it's Hitchcock and slasher film.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Well, I don't want to maybe bring this in too soon, but there's definitely something I want to address.
Oh, it's
here.
not a slasher film.
No, not that. No,
Alan's going to talk about mother issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I watched it, and watching it again, it really reminded me of you, Calvin.
Well, I've got to say, I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves here, but I watched the sequels in preparation for this, and I actually had to marathon 3 of the films last night just to get them seen in time. And I was watching, I believe, Psycho 4, the prequel, and there's a very uncomfortable, bordering on incestuous moment in that where the mother and son are sort of rolling around, and then it's implied he becomes aroused and she gets furious and starts beating him and putting him in a dress. And I just wanted to ask Calvin, did you watch these films before you realised you were gay, or because I'm just wondering if it factored into your psychological makeup in any
Well, oddly enough, yes. I saw the first one when I remember I was 13, and it was one of the very first horror movies I saw. I was a very impressionable child and easily frightened, but I was really getting into Hitchcock around this time, and everyone talked about Psycho, and I watched the first one when I was about 13 years old, and it scared me shitless. I was so terrified that Norman Bates was going to come and kill me.
See, that's again, Calvin. You put yourself into the female role in these things, like with Bond.
Well, Alan, he might have been imagining himself as the private eye, the hard drinking, hard hitting detective. You never know. But no, this is the difference between you and me. Whenever I watched a horror film, and certainly an old horror film at that age, I was just looking to laugh at it. And I know if I had seen Psycho at that age, I don't think I did see it quite so young, I would have just been laughing at the silly voice of the mother and the dodgy corpse at the end, and because I did that with most horror films that I saw back then.
That's a defense mechanism, Saul.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't even that. I was
laugh instead of cry.
An arrogant youth. No, it's because
putting the Muppet song on in the background to keep.
That was different. The zombies, man, they're bloody scary. Those things.
But when you hear the Muppets now, does it give you the willies?
Oh,
it's subliminally connected now.
But I suppose what I'm saying is you were clearly more mature at the age of 13 than I was.
Me? Oh.
Yeah.
So, Calvin, were you implying that when you were 13 you didn't know you were gay?
Well, I don't think I was thinking about such things. At
well, 13?
Really?
Come on.
At age 13?
Come on.
No, I don't remember.
What age were you when you first
oh, God.
diddled yourself?
Oh, dear. I'm so not going down this route.
And what did your mother say when she caught you?
So how about you, Ellen? Me and Sol both sort of saw this film when we were like early teens. Do you remember your first experience with it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was in my late teens when I really started sort of getting into films and looking into them. And like I bought one of those books that was like 501 films to see before you die. And so obviously Psycho is in all of those. So it would have come up in that kind of role. And obviously it being Hitchcock, it's kind of really one of the top of the list of those films to see when you're just getting into film kind of thing.
I mean, the shower scene certainly is a scene that is studied by film students.
It's one of those things I'd seen parodied so many times in so many cartoons and things, kids shows as well, that would do an almost plot for plot rendition of it at times. And I do kind of, watching it again last night just to refresh my memory and my thoughts on it, I was sort of thinking it's such a shame I never got to experience this properly without, because it's like this sort of Coen Brothers-esque way of making a film where it just takes a complete left turn and I'm sure people were expecting a Psycho in it, but
I was really I'm so happy that I saw it when I did, because I knew that there was a shower scene, so I knew that Janet Leigh got killed off halfway through the film. That was the only thing I knew about Psycho going into it.
That's a pretty big part of the twist and turn, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's a huge twist if you were seeing it fresh and knew nothing about it. The star of the movie dies. But I certainly had no idea where it was going to go after, because the whole first 45 minutes of the film are following Janet Leigh. She steals money from her boss and travels across the country, and then she's killed in the shower, and the whole plot has been about this money that she's stolen so that she can get away with her boyfriend. She's sick of her life. And then the money is just tossed in a swamp. Like, Norman Bates doesn't even know that the money is there. It's like a plot device that is completely thrown out, and then all of a sudden, as you say, they just pivot and the narrative goes in a completely different direction.
Well, can I just throw something out here, right? Let's get this conversation started. Obviously, there's lots of things in Psycho that I like, and I think it feels to me like a great director playing around a bit and like just experimenting. And the fact that it was done such low budget, like he obviously wanted lower risk. He didn't want people kind of looking over his shoulder. He just thought, I'll just crank something out that's kind of a little bit interesting and do something different. And I think on that level it works. It's obviously had a great influence. I think just as a standalone film, doesn't really work. And part of that is because of that kind of huge gear shift in the middle where it completely changes and it feels like the first half hour of the film is like totally wasted. And that's I was kind of interested in what you would say about that, Calvin, because I know how much you like the film.
Oh yeah, it's probably my favourite film.
If you look at it kind of objectively, as a standalone film, without kind of the Hitchcock background and all that and the influence it's had, do you think it works?
It depends on what does it achieve what the director set out to do? Yes. And the director set out to ultimately just shock everyone by spending 45 minutes building up this character. You think she's the star, we're going to follow her, and then kill her. The whole first 45 minutes is purely building up to that moment. But Hitchcock himself was very... Are you going to stand on the... Because I've heard this is a criticism about the film from a lot of people, that the first half of the film is thoroughly entertaining and interesting, and the second half just kind of peters out and meanders.
That is how I felt watching it this time. I always thought it was an okay film, but I was expecting to come away, having rewatched it, thinking that I had underestimated it and that it was great. And I came away, as I often do, just feeling almost exactly as I did, and which is that it's like, it's okay. But the bulk of that is that, the first 45 minutes are actually really entertaining and really engaging, and then the big shock sequence happens, and then after that, it's kind of just dull. Certainly comparatively, when the private eye comes looking, and I don't know if it would have played better if I didn't know where it was going.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking
back of my hand
as well.
with his mother.
Yeah, if you were genuinely went into that film and was shocked by it, and then you're like, oh my god, what's going to happen next then? If they've killed off the main, like, what's going on? Like, I wish I knew what that was like going into it.
Because if I just thought it was his mother stabbing people and this guy caring for her, which is what it does if you don't know the twist, that's not very interesting to me. Just an old woman keeps stabbing people.
But the problem with that is, does this work? Because whenever you see the murderer, it's like shadow and like a 6'4" kind of man in a dress, and it's like,
And they go out of their way to never show you her face.
Yeah, and if it's obviously saying, hey, it's the mother killing people, but we're not quite showing you what. And the only other person it could be is Norman. So there's no twist to it because I'm watching it now knowing that already. I don't know how much that plays into
that's it. And I don't know how much of that is that we're watching this through modern eyes and we're more genre savvy. Maybe audiences in the 60s wouldn't have picked up on that. Maybe they weren't as clued into the conventions of film and
I don't even think it's the conventions of film and language of cinema, because I think a lot of Psycho set a lot of the groundwork for these kinds of twists later on, because those kind of psychological, I don't think anyone would have been thinking, because psychology wasn't really in the public eye all that much, so I don't think anyone in the audience would have thought, oh yeah, this is Norman dressing up as his mother and killing people. I think that thought would have probably been out of the question. Hitchcock himself made Spellbound a few years earlier, which was all about psychiatry, and is one of the first films kind of that explores psychology, really. So he had a great interest in it. But when I have very clear memories of when I first saw the film, because I knew the Janet Leigh twist, the shower scene. The other big twist in the movie is obviously that there is no mother doing the killing. It is Norman dressing up as his mother and speaking in her voice. I didn't know that, so I was completely with the film, like, sort of thinking, why are they not showing me this woman? And there must be something odd going on here. And then when she turns around at the end, Vera Miles goes up to the chair and it spins around and it's a corpse. I genuinely, for a few seconds, thought it was a zombie and that the zombie was killing people, and that's why it didn't show the
that
face.
would have been scary. But I don't know how you made it to the age of 13 without knowing that.
Neither do I.
You didn't even know he was gay. I mean, come on.
Yeah. But, it's Principal Skinner's mother. It's such an ingrained part of pop culture now. The Norman Bates and the mother, and I'm pretty sure I was clued into all that at age 13. Why did he make the film the way he did then? Surely the thing to do would be make the first half the first 80%, and then you do this crash reveal at the end, and
because that wouldn't work, because then Janet Leigh is there as the star of the movie for the majority, and the thing that tickled him was killing off the star literally halfway through.
But did he get any further than that? He just went, oh, that'll be a cool trick to play in the audience, and then we'll just shove some film at the end.
Well, I think the moments that I think the first 45 minutes obviously appealed to him a lot, building up to the shower scene, and then the very ending when it's revealed that Norman is actually in all that sort of. I think the scenes with Norman Bates work very well. There's just all these scenes in between of Lila and Sam in the hardware stores.
I completely agree. Actually, that is absolutely it. It's not the Norman Bates stuff that I find dull. It's the looking for the missing woman detective stuff that I find very dull.
Well, I like Martin Balsam when he's questioning Norman Bates, and there's that little interplay. It's quite subtle, and he figures out he's lying to him and goes, "Oh, he's really acting really weird," but he plays it off quite cool. I liked all that, and then there's a scene where he goes on the phone and basically spends a 10-minute scene explaining everything we've just watched.
Oh, I know.
And now
what was that?
They need it because they need the other characters to know what's happened. But it's such a bad way of doing it. It's so exposition heavy. It's so boring.
You don't need to have characters explain stuff to the other characters on screen.
Yeah.
If you're really that worried that the audience won't piece it together, then you just start the scene with them going, "So then I says to Norman, blah, 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 blah." And they go,
dissolve out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was and then in a similar fashion, the very end where the psychologist pretty much just explains everything.
That was only deemed to be necessary. Hitchcock himself called it a hat grabber, but the screenwriter insisted it should be in there because people are not used to this kind of thing. We literally need to have this voice of authority coming in and talking about psychology and explaining to the audience what it is.
That's what really struck me about this, is you can tell why Hitchcock's such a great director, because there's so much of this that I can't even necessarily put my finger on. It's not a stylistic choice, he does this, it looks really cool. It's just whatever needs to be done to evoke an atmosphere, to create the tension or whatever, he seems to know how to do it. And then you got these bits where he's falling down the stairs on a weird back projection thing and it's just how does that slip up? And there's in the shower scene, there's a cut where, when she's reaching out to grab the shower curtain.
Oh, yes.
And you see her hand go out, and then it cuts to like her hand grabbing it. But the edit just doesn't quite work. It's just like a kind of a hand's in the wrong place, and it always jumps out at me. Little things like that. It's just like, how do things like that slip through when you're such a good director? It's like, how do you why did you not go, do you know what, that stairs scene looks shit, let's do something different?
Yeah. to say people really love that shower scene, I do think the sort of editing of just the stabbing montage really isn't nearly as impressive as everyone seems to think it is.
Again, I think you've got to see it in the context of the time. I don't think it's something that had really been...
They always go on about how, you never actually see the knife go in. It's like, it's
because it doesn't go in.
I picked up on that the first time I watched it.
There are 3 frames where it does penetrate the stomach.
Oh.
Are there?
Yeah. There's like, because they've got
penetrate
that one
or just
shot.
kind of poke a little bit.
Well, I mean, the blade goes in by like just the tip of it, just a tiny, like, it's literally 3 frames.
So it's not penetrating; it's like pushing against.
You could make that argument, I suppose.
I love how overanalyzed that scene is. There was this thing I was reading on the IMDb trivia thing, and one of the things was like, it said like, oh, as she falls and grabs the shower curtain, if you focus in on just behind the shower curtain and squint, you can definitely see her tits. It's like, wow, it really looked into this.
Well, that was Hitchcock getting something past the censors, because obviously this was... Psycho pushed a lot of boundaries in terms of American movie censorship, certainly. It's the first American film to ever show a toilet, which...
I read that as well,
because, yeah, because it's a plot device. Like, she puts a note in the toilet and tries to flush it, which her sister finds later on, which is evidence that she was there. Should
we talk about the music then? Because it obviously has a massive... effect on the how the film works and how effective the film is.
Hugely effective in terms of selling the film as a product, and kind of toes the line between thriller and horror really well.
Of course, Hitchcock. This was Bernard Herrmann who did the score. It was entirely his idea to do a all strings orchestra. I think Hitchcock said something about, like, I think I read something somewhere where he wanted like a jazz score or something, which I can't imagine how that would have turned out. And Hitchcock, obviously, it's famous that he wanted the shower scene unscored. He just wanted a completely silent murder, but Bernard Herrmann was like, no, let me do this. I've got a really great idea for it. And obviously, it's... Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a more iconic bit of film music.
Maybe the Jaws theme.
Yeah, possibly.
That's probably
Jaws,
the only thing
Star
that comes
Wars.
close. Yeah. But Star Wars is slightly different because that's just like proper music. That's been put on something. Do you know what I mean? It's not quite the same kind of...
Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't necessarily use that to evoke sci-fi like you would use the Psycho music to evoke horror.
Or the Jaws thing is just to evoke kind of an oncoming threat kind of thing.
Yes.
It's not quite the same, is it?
No, you're completely right. But it's the score is fantastic. And the theme, like when Janet Leigh's driving through the roads, it's so engaging and just tense. The whole thing, even though she's just driving down a road, it just helps build on this tension.
What I like about this film is that it's a director kind of experimenting, it feels like, and just trying to do things differently in the hope to just kind of create new things. And I like that. I like when directors do that. I don't necessarily like the end results. And like I say, it's one of those things it's more about how it influences things. It's the reason why like avant-garde film is interesting, even though it's not very good. But another director who does a lot of that sort of thing is Gus Van Sant. And so quite appropriate then that he did the remake of Psycho in 1998, which is pretty much a shot-for-shot remake. And it seems to be he did that just because... It was like, okay, well, let's just see what happens. If you just remake a film exactly as it was, will it find an audience? And now I like that he does that. I don't know how he got someone to pay for it.
Goodwill Hunting was...
Well, yeah, off the back
in the
of that, I guess.
documentary on the DVD, he talks about it, and the interview was like, so why, how did they let you do this? And he said, well, Goodwill Hunting made a lot of money, and now I can go to Universal and make what I want, so...
But I like that this is what he chose to do, and that he just thought, well, let's do something completely kind of unexpected.
There's one thing I want to mention actually that I've just remembered, is the house as well, the Psycho house, the Bates house.
Well, I
just
think
want to
that's
mention how how much I love the design of that house.
Oh, isn't it just perfect? Yeah.
I assume it was a set for
Yes.
the film. Yeah. So it's
But I think that's a good point to bring up when we're talking about the remake, because of all the things that the remake does, it just seems like, why did you make that decision is to change the house? Because the house in the remake is nowhere near as intimidating or frightening looking as the one in the original. I honestly don't know why they changed it when they kept so much of the other stuff the same.
Well, that's it. I don't know if you know anything more about this, Carly, maybe because it's your kind of area, but it's essentially a shot-for-shot remake, but then there are some changes, and then there's like, why did you change that? Like, why is that different? And it doesn't work, and it feels like that, you know, all the actors are using the same dialogue, but it feels so out of date. Like being in colour, and even though it's set in the 90s, the story doesn't feel any different. I think you get away with that. But there's certain things like a dissolved cut into the next scene, which you just don't see anymore. But when you see it in an old black and white film, it doesn't feel wrong. But when you see it today, it feels really weird. And then some of the editing didn't work for me. But I think that was because rather than being edited to like naturally to fit what was going on, it was being edited to fit the previous type, and so some of the lines feel a bit too quick, or the cuts just slightly in the wrong place, and it just makes it feel kind of awkward and uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, Van Sant was, when you watch the documentary, it's like the editor who he uses was kind of, she was always wanting to do like just speed something up a little bit. Or could we literally just take a few frames out here because it just feels weird and wrong. And I guess if you are like an editor working on a film like the Psycho remake, it must be incredibly frustrating to give it none of your own personality or like anything that you've learned. You're literally just copying. But I think a lot of the people on the set were working on different wavelengths. The costume designer only realized halfway during the shoot that this wasn't a period piece, that it was supposed to be set in 1998. 'Cause some of the costumes are so garish, and like
I
Rita
love
Wilson's hair, and it's
William H. Macy's like 1940s gumshoe kind of private detective hat.
Exactly. It's and apparently no one was on the same wavelength.
One thing I do like is Julianne Moore changes the character that she's playing.
Yeah.
She makes him a lot more feisty and kind of like, and it works a lot better. I think that's actually a stronger character, and she plays it very well. Yeah. But then everyone else kind of doesn't really change the characters. So like, why did she do it? Why was she allowed to do that? And it's like, it doesn't. Yeah, it feels just like no one knew what was going on with this film.
Yeah. And of course, we've tiptoed around that Vince Vaughn is Norman Bates in that. How do you feel about that, Alan?
Well, this is early Vince Vaughn, so he hadn't become the Vince Vaughn that we know. Like, he was still had pretensions of being a legitimate actor at this point. I actually think there's certain bits of it where I think, you know what, he can act. You know what I mean? He's doing some good stuff here. I think he's in a difficult situation where you're comparing it to Anthony Perkins. It's just, it doesn't work on that level. But I don't think it's a terrible performance, and I think perhaps if he'd been given more freedom, or if it was like an original role, perhaps he could have done something interesting with it. But yeah, it is just very un-Vince Vaughn kind of role, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
Now.
The only bit that feels right for him is when one of the bizarre changes they made is that when Norman's looking through the peephole at Marion taking a bra off, he masturbates, and it comes out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden you just hear this like. And it's like, what is he? And then it's over very quickly. Well,
that was interesting because when I watched the original again, I was like, I remember that scene like that they put that into the remake. I'm like, when I watch this again, I'm going to see, is it like implied in the original, but it's like obviously they couldn't show it, and it's like, no, it's not. It's not implied at all. He just has a quick look and then sort of turns shivs away.
But to be fair, they probably would be in very dangerous territory to even imply it back then.
Oh yeah. No, well, I mean, even if he'd lingered and watched for like longer, but he doesn't. He kind of looks, sees she's getting undressed, and kind of like feels shame, and then puts the thing back.
Yeah,
it's
my guess is that they felt that, oh well, if they'd been able to, they would have included that then, and just were trying to George Lucas the original film a little bit along the way.
That's what I mean. I don't think that's even implied in the original.
Because
the whole point is that he's kind of ashamed of his arousal, so he wouldn't act on it.
Yeah,
because his acting on it is to penetrate in a different way.
Like I agree with you. I don't think it's meant that way, but I can totally see how someone might.
Anyway, we've jumped ahead quite a bit here.
Well, yeah, Psycho came out, and then that was it. And then 23 years later, they turned around and did a sequel.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the behind the scenes? Like, was that like Anthony Perkins' career hadn't really gone anywhere or something like that?
Well, it was whether or not he was even going to come back was sort of up in the air for a while. Believe it or not, Christopher Walken was being explored as a potential recast. But yeah, I mean, it was the 80s, and slasher films were popular now. It was all the Friday the 13th, Halloween's, all that, and why not make a sequel? They were all getting like umpteen sequels.
Yeah, you're right.
So why not go back to the original and do that? Hitchcock was also dead at this point, so that helped. Yes, he died a couple of years earlier.
This is one of those sequels that isn't very well regarded, but there is a very strong cult following who will adamantly stick up for it and tell you, you know what, it's actually not that bad, it's pretty good, worth checking out. I've got a feeling you're part of them. Yeah.
Yes!
Yeah, so I went into it thinking, all right, this could be all right, and I think it's a bag of shit, to be honest. Well, it's just because it's just the most generic slasher film bollocks, and slasher films are shit. They're the lowest end of horror.
This is
bollocks.
A step above. You can't tell me that this is not a step above Friday the 13th Part 2 or even Halloween 2.
I mean, yeah, I'll go as far as say it's a step above Friday the 13th, the first one. It's still shit.
Any of them.
Like, it's just... They're just retreading the same old shit again, and you know exactly how it's going to play out. And the only element of surprise.
Really? Did you really know that Mrs. Spool was going to be revealed as the true mother of Norman Bates?
Well, not that big, because that's obviously
no.
something they just stuck on at the end.
Yeah,
like, halfway through filming, it had no connection to what had gone before, and doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stand by that twist.
Yeah. But I just mean in terms of Norman gets out and he starts doing it all again, and you know the teens break into his house so that they can get killed. And
but for me, it was like they've just done it as a straight up kind of murder mystery. Like who's doing all this killing kind of thing, which abandons like the gimmick of the first one in that it was not that and then became that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But fair enough, you're not going to be able to just do the same thing. But then, like by the end, I had no idea who was killing who. I don't know who killed the Vera Miles because the police think it was the daughter, but doesn't seem right. I think Norman killed some people because he's gone off the rails again.
I really like that about the film, that it is kind of open to interpretation. No, because at the end, this old lady appears, Emma Spool, and says that she was the one killing everyone. But Norman was definitely going kind of crazy, and there's some, like, the figure that kills Vera Miles is certainly not little Emma Spool, little 4-foot old lady. Like, that is a hulking person that comes in, shoves the knife in her mouth.
Yeah, you can't just stab a knife through someone's back of someone's head. It's like, it's not that easy. Like, you've got to have a bit of power behind you.
I've always liked to think that it was Norman that did Lila in.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I assumed. Yeah, and like, because he'd already gone a bit crazy by then.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea that they just sort of trigger him and he goes mental again. And one of the major things that it's missing is directorial flair. Like, it's just the most by the numbers bit of shooting, isn't it?
Doesn't the whole film just feel really sorry? Like this just sad thing that shouldn't have happened?
I disagree with the it shouldn't have happened, but I do think that it is kind of sad that Norman,
all right, should have happened 15
but
years sooner.
I think that just adds to the atmosphere of it, because I think it is really sad. Like there are, and I know you're both going to laugh at this, but there's the scene where Norman's really he's hovering over whether or not he's going to stab Meg Tilly, and she comforts him, and he starts talking about the toasted cheese sandwiches that his mum used to make him, and genuinely brings a tear to my eye when I watch that scene. I think it's so lovely, and the camera pans out, and it's one of the only sort of directorial flourishes in there when the camera pans back and it sort of leaves the set, and all around the set is just darkness, and it's just like it's a very odd shot, but I like it a lot. And I think that a lot of that comes from, it's been 23 years since we last saw this guy, and he's a bit of a sorry, sad state. Like, he looks like he's in great shape. He's wiry frame and whatever, but his face looks withered by time.
I don't know. It feels like there should have been a few sequels in the years before, and then you can come back for one when they're all old as like a big finale. It just feels a bit.
Whereas instead they're picking up when everyone is already old. Okay, I get that. But I like that enough time has passed. Like, it probably would take someone this long to be rehabilitated and to be let out in society. Where it's true. Like when you get onto between Psycho 3 and 4, they lock him away forever, and now all of a sudden he's out in a couple of years.
Yeah. What's I was saying with Psycho 2, it's generally not regarded as great, but it really does have a bit of a following who stick by it. How is Psycho 3 generally thought of?
Psycho 2 is generally considered the best of the sequels. Psycho 3 tends to get in recent years, I think it's getting a bit more of a reputation, largely because Anthony Perkins is actually directing this one.
Well, that's interesting because I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think Psycho 2 is the worst one.
Oh.
I thought Psycho 3 was a step up from Psycho 2. It's still not great, but it felt more unique. It felt like you say, it does kind of have a weird flavour of this whole religious stuff just thrown in there. And it isn't just retreading the same old murder slasher tropes quite as heavily as the second one did. I mean, it does kind of devolve into that.
No, that's interesting. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's probably my least favourite of the main sequels. Probably, I think a lot of it because it is just so weird, and Anthony Perkins is just indulging himself in odd sequences in which Jeff Fahey is naked and with lamps in front of his crotch, like shining them at a woman who's dancing in front of him. It's very, very peculiar.
Yeah, I agree. I think I find it being so odd a bit more interesting. It just feels like more of a legitimate piece of art that someone's made, whereas the second one felt like more of a product.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Anthony Perkins, it should be said, I'm not sure if either of you have done much research on this, but he was very influenced by the Coen brothers when he was making this film.
I was going to say, did you notice who did the music on this film?
Carter Burwell,
which, a couple of years after Blood Simple was this?
Yeah. Well, Perkins saw Blood Simple, and that was part of his big, influence for Psycho 3. He just wanted to make one of those films. It's a much grittier film than the previous one, isn't it? It's a bit
I think that's,
dirtier.
again, that's it. The second one feels very polished. The first film wasn't that at all. It was much, like you say, darker, grittier.
Well, yeah, one of the things that the screenwriter really wanted to do in this is at the end of Psycho 2, it's revealed that Norman's mother is not actually his mother, and it's this Mrs. Spool lady instead, and they completely undo that in the third film, because the writer thought it was a really stupid twist that the second one had, and he wanted things to return to normal.
I mean, I must admit, by the end of the third film, I just completely lost track of what was going on. Like, who was supposed to be his mother, or what, and all that.
There's this reporter character who's supposed to be investigating, and then she's she's getting out all this exposition, and it's a lot of exposition, while Norman is sort of stalking her around the house. And they end up just in Mother's bedroom, and the camera work would have you believe that they were in some kind of labyrinth or maze. It's like neither of them seem to know where the other one is in the room, and it's like, it's not very big, and there's just a bed in it. Like, the ending scene really annoys me.
I don't know, there's this weird relationship he strikes up with this nun who's having a crisis of faith, and she's suicidal, isn't she? And
yes.
It just sort of, he tries to save her, but then things happen, one thing leads to another, and he just ends up killing loads of people in the motel.
I mean, that's kind of his pent-up sort of, you could read it as sexual frustration, because he's really attracted to this nun and really wants to be with her, and it's like he's killing just to sort of let off steam, really. Like, especially like that woman on the toilet, there's a lady earlier on in a phone booth who he kills. Because it is a love story, really. He does fall in love
it is,
in
which is...
And the way she dies, I didn't like that because
Yes.
it's basically he sort of looks in the wrong direction and then accidentally knocks her down the stairs.
Yeah.
And then not only does she fall down the stairs, but managed to stay on her feet long enough to fall into a statue with a big
Oh
sword.
God, I forgot about that. Yeah, it's the most ridiculous. Like that felt like it had taken, like, out of all of the franchise, that felt like the bit that had taken the most influence from other slasher movies that had kind of come in the 80s.
It did feel like, well, we've got to have someone fall down the stairs. I mean, standard now. We've got to do that.
Well, I think one of the really great twists actually early on is when you think they're going to redo the shower scene when Maureen is in the bath and Norman's going to kill her. And then he whips back the shower curtain and she's already slashed her wrists. And
I really like that. That plays really well. I do like that sort of playing with your expectations of iconic moments like that.
One other thing as well, Norman kills Jeff Fahey's character, but he kills him not like as part of his psychosis. He kills him to protect himself. It's kind of like, well, this guy's blackmailing me, he's going to dob me in, so I need to get rid of him. That's very different motivation, and it doesn't make Norman a sympathetic character, like who's kind of a mentally, flawed, so we kind of feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a wrong choice, but an interesting choice. I don't know if anyone actually thought about it.
I don't know.
There's a bit more of that in the fourth film.
On the Jeff Fahey thing, I think we're supposed to think of Jeff Fahey as the villain, and I think we are kind of supposed to be behind Norman when he beats him to death with his own guitar.
I think you are.
Yeah, but just because he's an arsehole is not... maybe in film terms, that is enough to just kill him off.
It is really a film full of just... everyone is either sad and suicidal or evil and trying to manipulate Norman. Like, even the reporter lady who's throughout the whole film and investigating, she's pretty dreadful. Like,
I know
she's
she
adamant
is.
on getting him
I hate
behind
her,
bars.
yeah.
Like, you want her dead at the end. I think the only character who, is sort of seen as like a relatively good person is the sheriff who comes back from the second film. And even then, he has that scene where he's eating the ice. Like, Norman's put the corpse of one of his victims in the ice box and he's picking
Do you like that scene, Calvin?
I love it.
The sort of thing you
I
like.
do like that. I like that.
I did really like that. I think that the movie does have a lot of Hitchcockian dark humour in it, like that, which the second one was missing.
Again, that's part of why it works better for me. It just has more of, like you say, humour, more little set pieces that are just interesting bits of character interplay. Because, that ice scene isn't just a joke. It's also like a very tense moment where, is this guy gonna... And very Hitchcockian, is this guy gonna find this, corpse that's right next to him, or is he gonna...
I don't know, though, because then it goes to Norman Bates, like, looking at the ice, like, going... like he's doing this kind of comedy, oh gosh, kind of look.
I don't think it's quite that over. I think it's underplayed. The ending of Psycho 3 was a studio mandate that you had to end on something a bit creepy because Anthony Perkins wanted the movie to end with Norman says, I'm free, I'll finally be free. And that's quite a lovely, he's free of his psychosis. If this was the last Psycho movie, he's free of his problems, but he's locked up forever. He'll never get out again. And that's quite a nice ending. But then instead he, pulls out this hand of Mrs. Spool, who isn't even his real mother, and then begins stroking it and smiles at the camera. And it kind of ruins...
Yeah.
It ruins any kind of nice... What the ending could have been.
So he's not free at all. He's still completely nuts.
And it just completely undercuts what he previously said, which was quite nice. But anyway, never mind. That's the studio for you.
Now, so before the Psycho 4,
Yes.
there was a film called Bates Motel, which was... Now, bear in mind, I watched the Psycho films, but I didn't watch this. I don't really know anything about it. So
have you seen it, Calvin? I assume you have.
Yes,
because I watched this as well. I didn't realise until afterwards that it was actually a pilot for a TV series that didn't get picked up, which was all the more baffling, frankly, because I can't for the life of me figure out where they were planning to take it. But I guess we'll get to that in a second.
I had a real hard time finding this because I heard about this. Like I say, I was getting into Psycho in my mid-teens, and this is just about when YouTube was starting up, and LimeWire was there, but it wasn't. There was no way of actually finding.
Yeah,
this anywhere online.
It's not available legally in this country anywhere. So is it? Did you import the American DVD?
No, I got the VHS, which was released in the UK. I managed to find one on eBay, and I must have paid about like £20 for it. So I do have the VHS. I didn't rewatch it for the purpose of this, but I've seen it the once, and that's
it. I in order to track this film down and obtain it, I just turned to the internet.
Yeah, no, it's
you got it off LimeWire.
But
good old LimeWire. But the file I found was, it was very clearly a digitized copy from a VHS tape that had been played through with all the imperfections, and the audio would occasionally go and just.
But yeah, it's basically Bud Cort is a roommate with Norman in the lunatic asylum, and Norman dies, bequeaths the Bates Motel to this guy called Alex. And the plot is kind of, it's about an hour and a half long, and he meets this girl played by Laurie Petty. It's the two of them, and then a local man, and they get the motel up and running for business. But there's some real estate guy who wants rid of the motel, and he's going to build a condo on there or something like that. And then he's dressing up as Mother and oh, it's haunted. Ooh, let's sell it to me. Ooh. But then there's also this really weird subplot involving Jason Bateman.
Yeah.
Well, this, I think, you mentioned earlier, Sol, about how on earth would they make this into a series, and I think this subplot is what they would do, because this woman who checks into the motel and she's going to kill herself, and then these ghost teenagers appear. One of them is Jason Bateman.
But it's a twist that they're ghosts.
Yes, it is. It is.
These teenagers show up, and it's like a throwback 50s, what is it, like prom night or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's invited along, and they're all like, oh, and then the big twist that is pretty obvious is the only reason it isn't obvious is because you don't quite expect them to just suddenly take the Psycho franchise into genuine fantasy.
Yes, supernatural.
Yeah, but the big twist is, oh, I'm a ghost. I killed myself. Don't kill yourself. We're all ghosts. We all killed ourselves in Bates Motel. Don't kill yourself. But it's so fucking weird, because throughout the entire film, you're just waiting for Alex to kill someone.
Yes.
And it never comes. There's no murder in this entire film.
Especially at the time this was made, which was the late 80s, they're never going to have a murderer as the main character. So he's just a little bit quirky, and him and his mates are going to run this thing, and every episode, every week, there'll be a new character who arrives. It'll be like Fantasy Island, Murder, She Wrote,
well, that was
whatever.
What I was
They're bringing in
wondering.
Were they
planning to have oh, this guest's a werewolf. Ooh, this guest's a vampire. No, Alex, bring me some blood. Oh, because I don't know what else you could do with it. You can't do ghosts every week of suicide victims.
Well, exactly.
Where were they planning to go with it?
It's for the best that it was never made. I think we can all agree.
It's just everything. None of it makes sense. At the end of the thing, the main character turns to camera and directs the audience directly.
Yes.
And let me just dig up what it is he says, or do you know it, Calvin, by any chance?
I can't say for sure what you'll find, but it is what makes the world go round.
No, but doesn't he say something like?
Oh yeah, he says if you ever need a room, come by.
Yeah, it's like Wayne's World. It's so weird.
You do wonder what the impulse was. Obviously they had this set on the backlot. The set is still there in Universal Studios. You can go and tour around in LA. Cool. So I don't know if they just had it and were like, what can we do with this?
And then they went and made Psycho 4. TV movie.
The beginning.
Yeah, and I that really did feel like something of an attempt to course correct.
Yes.
Well, yeah, this is interesting. What maybe Calvin, what was the thinking behind Psycho 4? Because it seems to jettison the second and third films.
Kind of.
But then, it doesn't really stick to the first film either. Because the ages are all different, and the motel was built before she got this boyfriend, and all this sort of stuff that doesn't fit with what you see in the first film either.
I think it's just very slack continuity. It was the screenwriter of the original film came back, Joseph Stefano.
Oh, really?
And he wrote it. Yeah, which is bizarre because he didn't like 2 and 3.
Yeah,
and so he wanted to course correct, as you say, and just like do a direct sequel to the original. But they do mention at a couple of points, those murders a few years ago. Like it is acknowledged just in dialogue very quickly that 2 and 3 could have happened in this continuity.
Yeah.
Can I ask, like I did with 3, how this one is generally regarded amongst like psycho aficionados?
Not very well regarded.
Oh, really?
I think the
See,
Anthony...
That's interesting. This is probably my favourite of the sequels.
Wow.
Again, yeah, I mean...
It's not a great film, but there's some interesting things in there.
I genuinely enjoyed this one.
Oh.
It's not
I mean,
great.
I like it a lot. But...
Yeah, it's not amazing, but it's good fun, watchable. There were some scenes in this that seemed very, like, similar to scenes in Bates Motel, and I'm sure you're well aware of it. So, just out of interest, was Bates Motel directly referencing this film, or are they both going back to, like, stuff from the book that was left out, or...
I think it... I mean, I can only assume that the people making the new Bates Motel TV show, they must have gone back and seen all the films at some point.
I assume most of them are big Psycho fans, and that's how they've kind of come to it, but yeah.
But I can't imagine that it was a conscious, oh yes, this will be a nice little reference to Psycho 4. I think they're purely going to the first film for inspiration.
Fair enough.
All those characters anyway. Yeah. But yeah, this one kind of came about, Anthony Perkins really wanted to direct it again, but because Psycho 3 was a bit of a flop, he was rejected, and they brought in Mick Garris, who has sort of directed some of the sort of low-budget horror.
That interested me because I looked him up. Seems to make a career like these low-budget horror things. But I actually really liked it. One of the things I liked about this film is that it feels like it's there's a director doing something, rather than just saying, put a camera over there. It's like, it feels there's a bit of thought gone into the visuals and like a bit of directorial flair.
And it felt...
And that's one of the things I like about the film.
It felt like, even though it was essentially just a framework for a series of murders, it felt like it had a lot more going on than that, which isn't really how your average slasher movie plays to me. And I think that's why I quite enjoyed it. I want to talk about the cast a bit, though, because... Olivia Hussey plays Norma Bates in this. So Norma Bates is now Argentinian. What's that about?
Yeah, her accent is all over the place at the best of times. Like we've looked at this actress before in Black Christmas, if you remember her from that.
Hello?
but it's all the more jarring that like Norman doesn't affect an accent when he does her voice. That's what really...
I can't imagine either of you had seen this film before.
No,
how
I
did
watched
you
it
feel
for the
about
first time last night.
Mother up until this point has been woman in rocking chair with grey hair, and now all of a sudden it's this beautiful 40-year-old Olivia Hussey.
It was a little bit jarring to me, but I think I'd already dealt with that with Bates Motel, the more recent TV series, because that's the same sort of thing.
I mean, in terms of how it works with the continuity, I'm not sure. But in terms of how it works straight up in this film, I really like it. I think she's great. I like that character.
I read that the director was very consciously, he wanted to cast a Norma who was as attractive and enigmatic as Norman was in the first film. Because obviously he's this good-looking, handsome young man. And I can see it. I think that's quite a nice idea. And like Alan, going back to what you were just saying about a director's vision, that's the sort of thing that comes across in this film, that there was someone making decisions like that and thinking about stuff on that level.
But what can I just say, what I really liked about it, and specifically to her character, is just how kind of brutal and raw that is, like the way like her mental illness is. Because I'm so used to seeing this kind of Hollywood gloss of what mental illness is, and like an acceptable form of mental illness shown on film, that this feels much more real.
Yeah.
It feels like just the way she speaks, the way she acts, the way she just flips like a switch. It feels like you wouldn't get that in a mainstream film. Like it has to be this kind of low budget kind of thing that's slightly under the radar. Yeah. She performs it really well, and the boy, like, I don't think Henry Thomas is a particularly good actor, but the character works. that he's just sort of slightly scared of her, but he's in awe of her. And then they obviously have these moments where they're actually really close, and you see enough of that that you understand like this abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And why he kind of loves her but hates her and scared of her and becomes her and all that sort of thing. I think that all that works really nicely, and I like all those bits of it. I don't like any of the stuff that happens in the kind of contemporary modern...
See, well, even that I don't mind. I like having Anthony Perkins there. It does feel a bit like a laboured... means of fitting him in and giving a bookend. But I
don't
like
mind the
little...
kind of the framework that sets up the flashbacks. I don't like the end, I guess.
Yeah, the ending's a bit silly, but I like the stuff leading up to it. I love when he snaps that apple in half, for example. There's a lot of nice little character moments like that.
The directors talked about that. That was like a genuine thing that Anthony Perkins did on the set, and they used it in the film because he was so pissed off with the director. He was giving him a really hard time throughout this whole shoot, partly because he felt like he should be the one directing it, also partly because he was diagnosed as HIV positive during filming.
Wow.
So he wasn't in the best of moods.
I think that comes across though when you watch it. I think this is my favourite of the performances that we get of Norman Bates in the sequels, because it feels like a man who is, sincerely at the end of his rope and like really dealing with some shit, and I think that comes across.
Was the over, because the incest in here is kind of overt. Did that surprise either of you? Because I still on TV now, I think it's still quite a taboo.
It didn't surprise me.
It feels like it was always implied.
Yeah,
in the so
it was always implied.
And there's obviously a sexual kind of element to these killings.
Again, I've started to get used to it because of the Bates Motel TV series, but I mean, it wasn't a surprise, but it did make me very uncomfortable. But I think that's to the film's credit, because that's the point, It is.
And it's like I was saying about the mother character and how she behaved and all that. I don't think you would see that in a mainstream film even today. Yeah. And that's why I like this film. It's kind of like, it feels like it's doing something unusual and something like when you watch like European films, and it's like, wow, you'd never see this in a Hollywood film, and it's like, but obviously that's good.
I've got to say as well, people always say in horror films, oh, I was just waiting for them to die. I couldn't wait for them to get killed. They were doing my head in about characters. I've never really felt that way until the first woman in this film. Oh, I really couldn't wait
the young woman who's like really slutty.
The perky one that he kills first.
The one who just doesn't behave like a human being. She's like he says, "Oh, wait for me in there, and I'll come back." And then she like just sneaks off to the house. So she's like anticipating. She's like, "Well, no, I definitely want to do it in a bed." And then she like goes into.
She's like, "Oh, I definitely want to do it in front of your mum."
And that's it. She goes into the mum's room and sees the mum, and then like thinks it's gonna be really funny to like push this what she thinks is an old woman in bed who's ill.
I do love the other girl that Norman is seen murdering, the sort of older lady who seems like a bit of a cougar.
Yeah,
sort
she's
of thing.
alright.
I love how, because he strangles her, and then she sort of like comes back to life when he's about to chuck her in the swamp, and he has to strangle her again, and then he like locks her in the boot of the car just as it's being pushed in, and then you hear her like banging from the inside of the thing like she's come back again. I thought that was really cool and creepy.
Is that supposed to show that he's learned that he really has to stab people? That's the only way to get the job done.
Yeah, I think so.
This is like he's a young murderer still learning his craft.
So we mentioned the ending briefly, but the very ending, like the when Norman is going through the house, he's setting it all on fire, and he's seeing ghosts, hallucinations of his previous victims.
Yeah.
I so wish. Obviously, they couldn't have done it on the budget, probably. But I was so wishing that they could bring back people from the other movies.
That would have been good.
Even like Vera Miles in the basement, and like even get back Janet Leigh, and like I think it would have been a cute callback. Yeah. But it is probably the only, happy ending in the series. But it's like Norman says, I'm free, I'm finally free, to his psychiatrist wife, and then goes away. And then there's a little button on the end when we hear the voice of Mother. But then the doors to the cellar slam, and that's it. That's the end. And I think for Anthony Perkins to go out as Norman Bates like this is quite lovely. I think it's
agree.
a really sweet ending.
It feels like a very conscious. This is the final chapter. This is the last Psycho. We're closing the door on the story. And I'm sure they would have figured out a way to make further ones if they could have done, and if it would have been worth their while. But as an ending, it's nice.
I haven't seen Bates Motel, this TV show, and don't really know anything about it. So what is it?
I'll try not to spoil too much then, because it is pretty much Psycho 4 as a TV show without the old Norman Bates wraparounds. It's Norman Bates.
So is it it's like a prequel? It's early.
Yeah, it's Norman Bates,
Yeah,
Freddie Highmore, and Norma, his mother, played by Vera Farmiga. And the first episode is they move to this new... I mean, the thing was filmed in Canada, so it's not set in sort of LA, California, Nevada desert now. It's set in... I think they say it's set in Oregon or something.
Okay.
And yeah, they buy the motel and house, and the house looks exactly the same as it does in the film. And it's Norman Bates starts going to school, and it's really good. So I'm not sure
what's the narrative drive of it? Is he killing people?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, there's a whole subplot that I'm not a fan of with his brother. There's this whole bullshit about his brother, and he's into not organized crime, but kind of redneck drug dealing and that sort of thing. So
it's very out of character. Like, the series is at its best when it's Norman and Norma having mother-son bickering, and there's a creepy person staying at the motel. What's all this about? They might have a secret.
But my understanding is that season 5 that has just started, or is just starting in America, this is the final season, isn't it? It's what they've been building to, and it's just a remake of Psycho.
Yeah, they've cast, I'm not sure how much of the season is that, but they cast Rihanna, the musician, as Marion Crane. Obviously, they went for the biggest name they could possibly get, and I guess that's what you get.
It almost feels to me, I almost wonder if someone just wanted to remake Psycho, but they kind of knew no one would go for it in this day and age, and there'd be so much uproar. So we're like, right, we've got to spend 4 years making this prelude to get everyone on board with this, and just get them all into the idea of us remaking Psycho, and then by the time we've done that, everyone will be on board.
But it is a really... Bates Motel is a really great show. I'd recommend it. It's a good exploration of a descent into madness, I guess. Well, this is going to be a bit of a diminishing returns first, because I am going to pitch an idea that I had when I was 16. And I wrote something, and I was quite...
Please, are you reading it out word for word, please?
I've adapted it. I've adapted it a bit.
Oh, I want to hear 16-year-old Calvin's writing.
It was too embarrassing. I couldn't do it.
I've read some of those old scrolls, haven't I? They're amazing, from the very sexually frustrated years of. I remember reading something in a notebook about a woman who, quotes, hasn't had any cock in 7 years.
What? Was that me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, dear, that's very crude of me, isn't it? Oh, I wouldn't be like that these days. Dear, dear, dear.
But I think you were working through some issues at the time.
Oh, dear.
So this is Psycho 5, basically. Then,
yeah, this is Psycho, the next generation.
When did you write this? About 2005?
Yes.
Something like that?
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out what the casting choices would be.
Oh, no, 2006. Sorry, 2006.
That era.
Oh.
Shall I just jump right into it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can... Okay, we'll get to casting later on. Okay, so Psycho, the next generation. Dun 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 dun. We're going to use the music.
Oh, I thought you were doing the Star Trek theme for a second. The next generation, like.
Oh. Okay. Okay, so we start the movie on a rainy night. We follow a car along a small road. We see it's being driven by Jamie Lee Curtis.
Of course.
She looks worried. Obviously, Janet Leigh's daughter. So, who was actually up for the role in Psycho 2. But she decided not to do it for whatever reasons. Anyway,
that would have made sense. She would write sort of casting bracket.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, we see a sign, Bates Motel. Jamie pulls up and goes to reception. There's no one there. She looks around. No one there, but she's desperate to have a rest. It's very late. She leaves a note at the desk and takes the key for cabin 1. We follow her doing a little unpacking, and we see as she
turns around. Oh, it's only James Bond. Hello, could I help you to your room?
No, I wasn't that bad. Anyway, we follow her doing a little unpacking, and we see as she opens up a compartment of her suitcase, she's carrying millions of dollars. She, of course, gets undressed and gets in the shower. She's washing herself. A door opens in the background and a figure slowly approaches Jamie Lee Curtis. The curtain is whipped back and Jamie turns and the knife, she screams, a knife appears and with one slash cuts off her head. Much like how the murder scene is written in the book. That is actually how the shower scene is written in the book.
What?
Yeah. The line is something
That's
like...
Not...
Then
is he using like a machete?
the line is something like, and then the figure produced a knife which cut off her scream and her head, or something like that. Anyway, the camera whips around and we see it's Vince Vaughn in drag, but I'm talking like Rocky Horror Picture Show drag. And he turns and goes back into cabin 1 and starts rummaging around in the money, and he's talking in his mother voice about how we can finally move away and get out of here. And
are we gonna have real Psycho come in and kill Vince Vaughn?
Well,
like when the Japanese Godzilla franchise had Godzilla beat the shit out of the American Godzilla because they weren't happy with the remake from the 90s.
Actually, that'd be brilliant. But no, instead walks B. Arthur. Who goes over? You're such a good son, Norman.
Was she still alive at the time?
Mother is. She was in 2006.
B. Arthur only died quite recently, didn't she?
2010, I think. I remember the day because we were meeting at the park, us lot and a few friends, and as soon as I joined the group, the first thing that Alan said to me was, "B. Arthur's dead."
I just knew you'd be interested. Well, it says here April 2009. Yeah, so
okay, yep.
So are all these casting decisions of yours authentic to the original idea from when you were 16, or have you kind of filled in?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, these are all the people I would have cast in 2006. So it's actually got Mother's real, and Norman's mad, and they're gonna go and do some crimes and stuff. It's at this point that we pan around to see that what we're actually watching is a movie being projected. And it's being watched by... I was very influenced by Scream around this time. So this was my attempt to do Psycho as a Scream slasher movie.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, we see a small audience, including right at the back, Norman Bates Jr. And please bear in mind, this was 2006. Who did I cast as Norman Bates Jr.?
How old are we talking about?
18.
18.
When was Zac Efron about?
What's the kid?
Oh my god! How did you? Oh shit! You got it in one.
Oh.
I can't believe that. Oh my god!
Well, who else, Carvey? Come on.
Wow. Oh, I thought that was going to be 10 minutes worth of great material that we were. Okay. At this point, Norman Bates Jr. walks out of the theatre. He's a bit upset at what he's seen, and he goes home where Connie Bates, his mother, is waiting for him with dinner. They live in a nice modern home, and they have a conversation about the movie. Obviously, it's the story of Norman Bates is quite famous, and it's been adapted into a film, and it's having an effect on their lives. They're both very displeased with the crassness of it and whatnot. But now, Junior has been suffering from visions of his dead grandmother. So, they live in a nice modern home. Wait
a minute, are we supposed to... So this is Norman Bates' son?
Yes.
And so who's the mother?
Connie Bates. We're going to get back the same actress from Psycho 4. I don't think she's doing anything else.
It's supposed to be that. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's direct chronology from that.
Oh, yes. Like, Psycho 4 ends with the baby crying. This is the baby grown up. A little bit older than what they probably would have been, but we can fluff the timeline somehow.
Okay.
Junior's been suffering from visions of his dead grandmother. It's like she's been haunting him, and while this was suppressed by his psychologist mother in childhood, the new movie has brought it all up again, all this angst about grandmother and blah-de-blah. So, Junior sneaks out to make pilgrimage to the site of the old motel and burned-out house, in hopes that this will somehow cure him. This doesn't actually make a lot of sense, but I'm going by, like, Psycho 4 logic of no one minds when people just like rock up at this creepy old abandoned motel. Now, while he's there, he's in the house up top. A bunch of young, sexy college students turn up to spend the night at the abandoned motel. Junior is up in the burned out house and he sees the teens and is about to leave when he falls through a semi-burned floorboard and lands in the basement. Okay. He coughs and gets up, and there before him is a dark figure with long grey hair shrouding the face. The figure turns and walks into the darkness. Junior pursues, but the figure has vanished. Is he going psycho like his father before him? Now, here we have some teen slasher stuff as the mysterious figure kills their way through the teens while Junior meets with this. I've only cast one of the teens, and it's Alicia Cuthbert, who I'm not sure if you're aware of. Are you aware of her?
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Who is it? I know the name, but not.
Yeah, she was Kiefer Sutherland's daughter in 24.
She did a film called The Girl Next Door in like 2004 or something, which is why I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
And she did House of Wax in 2005, which I really liked. Anyway, she and Junior sort of meet up and have a bit of a will they, won't they relationship. And Junior is semi-convinced that he's the one going crazy and killing people, but Alicia is convinced otherwise. And the cast is whittled down until it's just Junior and Alicia. And we have a final showdown with the mother figure. The pair manage to apprehend her and pull back the hair to find it's Meg Tilly, a.k.a. Mary from Psycho 2, who has escaped her insane asylum and come back to the place where her own mother was murdered. Turns out it really is the Crane and Loomis clan that are the villains of the series. That was a line that I took directly from my other pitch. I'm not quite sure what I had against the Cranes and the Loomises when I was 16. But it's quite a poor family, really. Like, they just all get murdered.
Oh, wait. Marion Crane, Fraser Crane.
Oh.
Oh, all right. So then, I'm changing my pitch. Marion goes to visit her brother in Seattle. And but Fraser has like a really like fancy new bathroom, and obviously he doesn't have like a shower curtain. He's got like a glass thing. That Norman comes in and tries to kill Marion, but it's glass and he can't quite get through it, so she's safe. That's the end. Anyway, so she's Meg Tilly is taken away by in the police by I want a new sheriff to be played by Gary Chalk, who I don't think either of you will know, but Gary Chalk played a sheriff. He played a sheriff in Freddy vs. Jason, and this was my subtle, like, maybe there'll be a crossover somewhere down the line. He'll, we'll have all three slasher people in one go.
Because Gary Chalk's in it. Because a guy who played it.
I mean, just to give you some idea of the nature of Gary Chalk's career, I've just looked him up. He has 367 credits. So he's a jobbing actor.
He does a lot of voice work. Yes, Right, so we cut to several months later, and a new sign is being installed at the motel. It's switched on and flashes Bates Motel, as it looks like Junior has renovated the place and is open for business once again, as we end with Junior being interviewed by CCH Pounder's character from Psycho 4, and that's the end. I just wanted to throw her in at the end. There's no real good reason for her being there, but I just really liked her, I think. That was what I would have done when I was 15, 16.
I'm not quite sure I got what the ending was. What was the conclusion of the film? So I think I was distracted by Gary Chalk.
So yeah. Who among us isn't in most days of our lives? Well, it was Meg Tilly who'd escaped from the mental asylum.
Yeah. Oh, she was.
Yeah,
yeah.
She was the killer. And then Gary Chalk took her away, and then Junior decides to open the motel again.
So is there a setup for a sequel?
Yes, with Gary Chalk.
So the Gary Chalk Adventures.
No, it's going to be Freddy versus Jason, and maybe Freddy can bring back Norman from hell. And we'll have to get a new actor to play him, but I think it might work.
And I bet you'd stick Optimus Prime in there as well, wouldn't you? You make me sick.
Okay, so my pitch. I want to pitch a TV show,
Ooh.
a sitcom,
Oh.
And it'll be based in sort of late 50s, early 60s. It's not going to be direct continuity with the other things. It's kind of before Marion Crane gets there, I guess. So Norman's there. He's at the motel. His mother comes out occasionally to kill people and that sort of thing. But the other regular characters are going to have. I want a guy working at the motel, does sort of general handiwork, works behind the desk every now and then, that sort of thing. A guy called Curtis. Now, I want him to be a black guy. Now, bear in mind, this is 1950s, sort of early 60s. So, a black guy in that time in Nevada, or wherever it's supposed to be, he knows how to keep his head down, right? So, he's got a job. He's not going to jeopardize it. So, basically, he helps clear up after mother's murders. So he finds like dead people and he's like, I'll just make this disappear. And because Norman has no memory of his mother's actions, as in when he is being his mother, he's not even aware that any murders are taking place. So like he'll just come down like, oh, where did that girl go who's staying in cabin number 4? And Curtis is going, oh yeah, she went this morning, like very early. So he's living in this little bubble of ignorance. And he genuinely thinks his mother's still alive. So into that, we have to introduce the other regular character who's going to be a young woman who's just sort of travelling through and ends up at the motel. Calvin, what's your mum's name?
Teresa.
Okay, so she's called Teresa.
Oh, my mum listens.
I was about to ask, does she listen? Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Mum.
She's actually dead. Calvin thinks she listens to it. He dresses up in a dress and listens to the podcast. And goes, oh, I'm so proud of my son. Okay, so this young woman called Teresa arrives. Now, her and Norman, they have an immediate chemistry. They go on a date, all that. Kind of a bit like the third film with the nun. But every time that little boner pops up, Norman switches on his guilt trip and he turns into mother. But then, under normal circumstances, he would then kill her, not remember. Curtis would get rid of the body. But then, in a series of kind of comedic japes, every time he tries to kill her, something goes wrong. So, like maybe he tries to stab her and as he lunges at her, he gets caught in the light fitting or something. Or like he's just about to jump out at her and she slams the door shut, not even realizing he's there. And like he just falls into the door, hijinks like that.
I would have gone a different direction for this if we're making it into a comedy. So the classic where you've got to be in two places at once. Norman has to keep excusing himself and like, oh, I just need the toilet, and then he like runs off and gets changed, and then he has to.
Yeah. Well, he could do like a Mrs. Doubtfire kind of thing where he has to keep turning up to events as his mother, and everyone thinks she's still alive. Or he saves Pierce Brosnan from choking. Or something. So he's trying to kill her, and he can't. But every time he kind of is foiled in his attempts, he just sort of reverts back to Norman. So he goes back to normal and can't remember it. And she doesn't even know he's trying to kill her. This delay, like eventually he would manage to kill her, but this delay means that Teresa and Curtis they get to know each other a little bit, they become friends. And so now Curtis decides he's going to protect her. And for the good of everyone, he's just going to protect her. So at first he just tells her, like, oh, you need to leave, you need to get out of here. But she insists, like, I want to stay like Norman, I'm going to try and have a relationship with Norman. Because when he's Norman, everything's great. So when next time Mother tries to kill her, Curtis actually intervenes and stops him. Norman's still insane. He doesn't realise when he's Mother. So Teresa, she decides she's going to stay, she's going to look after him with Curtis's help. They're going to help him live his life. So then the rest of the show, the continuing show, would be like the ongoing adventures of this little trio, with Norman getting into all sorts of scrapes with his mother, such as, Weekend at Bernie's style. Like they could go on holiday and he insists on taking the mother like in a wheelchair. And they have to just like put a big sun hat over her face so no one sees. And so it's basically the other two just keep getting him out of trouble whenever he's getting into these kind of weird situations, and he doesn't even realize it. And then you could have you've got this whole long-running kind of will they, won't they thing between Norman and Teresa, because every time anything gets close, he flips out and turns into a mother. So she has to kind of keep him at arm's distance, but then they're very attracted to each other. So you've got this whole thing going on. Regular characters like the sheriff, played by Gary Chalk. Or you could have like an old colonel who stays at the motel all the time.
If Gary Chalk's a series regular, maybe you do an episode where his brother from out of town, who's also a sheriff played by Gary Chalk, comes to visit, and they like interact with a line down the middle of the screen that they can't cross.
I think. One thing definitely have to do is someone like falls for the mother, because he only ever like talks to her on the phone or something, and so like it's like an older gentleman from town who comes up like trying to woo her with flowers, and then and Norman like has to try and put him off. Anyway, that's about it. That was just sort of a setup for a sitcom.
Very good. Yes, I enjoyed that.
Well, anyway, yeah. Following on from that, my idea is more of a. It could be a sequel or a reboot. A reboot. It's one of those soft reboots. It could be set in the same world. So, a real estate secretary named I've got named Marion Crane, but it could be called anyone really. She's discussing with her boyfriend Sam how they can't afford to get married because of Sam's debts. Then she goes back to work, and this guy drops off £700,000 in cash to pay a property. And her boss asks her to take that down to the bank. So she's like, yeah, no problem. She just goes driving. She's going to give it to her boyfriend. Getting a bit nervous and what have you. And, you know, all this stuff happens. We know what happens. We've all seen Psycho. It's basically that. She's driving on. She encounters a sudden rainstorm and decides to stop for the night at the Brighouse Bed and Breakfast. And... she asks the proprietor. She asks the proprietor, one Calvin Dyson, if anywhere's open that serves food, but it's Brighouse, so everywhere closed at 6 p.m. And so he invites her to dinner with him.
I'm just having some sandwiches and milk.
No. We're close. No, it's Tuesday, Alan. So that means that tonight is fish and milk.
Fish and milk?
Okay, so I need to explain this to the listeners, because I'm from a small town in Yorkshire called Brighouse, where Sol decided to set his pitch and name his hotel proprietor after me. Now, all the way when I was growing up, on Wednesdays, actually, Sol, you remembered it incorrectly, we would go to my grandma Barbara's, and she would make my sister chips and me fish and milk, it is a lovely dish. You put the fish in with the milk, and you eat it sort of like cereal, except it's hot and it's with fish instead of cereal. And that's
the least appetizing way you could have described it.
It's lovely. It's a lovely dish.
Fish and milk.
Yes.
So Marion accepts, and then she hears an argument between Calvin and someone else, sort of shouting at each other about bringing a woman into their house. So then Calvin comes back, and they just eat in the sort of office. He tells her about his hobby of doing this film podcast thing, and his life with James Bond, who is mentally ill and forbids him from having a life outside. So he's only allowed to make videos about him on YouTube. Returning to her room, Marion sort of like, well, this is all a bit too much, decides to just return the stolen money, try and, apologise her way out of things. And she takes a shower, unaware that Calvin is spying on her through a peephole. Oh. And as she's showering, a shadowy silhouetted figure holding a gun spins into frame with some credits around, and then they shoot her. What a slippery end! And then shortly after, Calvin discovers the murder, and he's shocked and appalled, and so he meticulously...
Oh, mother! Blood!
Yeah. he takes Marianne's corpse, all her possessions, the car, and he just puts it in the car and sinks it in a river near the bed and breakfast.
There is a canal, actually, in Brick House.
Oh, canal. There you go. And,
Dump it in a canal. Like a shopping trolley.
And a week later, her sister, Marianne's sister, Lila, arrives. She's looking for her sister with the boyfriend, and they're all like, what's going on? This private investigator apparently is looking
Played
for
by Gary Chalk.
Yes! There we go. And he's trying to trace the money for the employer. And he eventually comes across the Dyson bed and breakfast, where Calvin's behaviour arouses his suspicions. He hears that Marianne met with James Bond, so he asks to speak with him, but Calvin refuses. And so then he goes and he makes a very clunkily written phone call just to like explain everything that's just happened to the other. And then he sneaks back into the Dyson home to find James Bond. And as he reaches the top of the stairs, James Bond just appears and says, "You look tired. You need to take a trip," and pushes him down the stairs. And then when they don't hear back from him, the private investigator, they go to the local policeman, who informs them that Sean Connery's been retired for 10 years, so he couldn't possibly be hanging around with Calvin, because he definitely wouldn't do it for free. So concerned, Lila and Sam make their way to the bed and breakfast, where they meet Calvin. Sam distracts him by striking up a conversation about Frasier, and he pitches an episode where Frasier mishears his dad talking on the phone to a watchmaker about how his ticker hasn't got more than a week left before it gives up. So Frasier goes out of his way to give him the best week of his life because he thinks he's going to die soon, just pampering him and everything like that.
Again, don't know if that's a real episode or something you've made up.
Meanwhile, Lila sneaks up to the house, and then Calvin eventually realizes what they're there for, so he knocks out Sam and rushes to the house. And so she sees him coming and tries to hide, going down the steps to the cellar. And there she finds James Bond sitting in a chair, maybe with a cat on his lap or something, who knows. And she turns him round to discover that he is in fact a Roger Moore sex doll dressed in an ill-fitting tuxedo that Calvin borrowed from his dad. And she screams, turns around, and there's Calvin just dressed there, fake stubble, wearing another ill-fitting tuxedo. He's
wearing a linen safari suit.
Yeah. And is brandishing a replica gold-plated gun from the man with the golden gun, signed by Sean Connery himself and limited to only 30,000 copies. But before he can attack, Sam, having regained his consciousness, attacks and subdues him. Then we pick up at the local courthouse, and a psychiatrist explains that Calvin had murdered Roger Moore in a sort of misery situation that occurred 7 years prior, feeling worried that his actions would stop James Bond movies from being made. Calvin then started dressing up as Bond and doing these weird review videos on the internet as a sort of cry for help. And it explains why, if you look at any of the press images of Roger Moore from the last 7 years, you'll see that they actually just kind of look like Calvin in a wig wearing some glasses.
Wow, I think that's the best pitch we've ever had on this show. That's like my life in a narrative.
Calvin, how much did you pay for that golden gun? Come on.
£300.
How limited edition was it?
It was limited to 3,000 pieces, I believe. And but it was not signed by Sean Connery because he's not actually in The Man with the Golden Gun.
I know. Is it? Well, was it Roger Moore then?
No, it's not signed by anyone.
Was it not? I just
no.
okay.
Christopher Lee did sign a few, but he had to pay an extra £200 for that.
Well, if you're Gary Chalk, do get in touch.
Let us know which is your favourite Psycho sequel.
Yeah, and those of you listening who aren't Gary Chalk as well, if you want to get in touch, that's fine too.
Come back to us when you've got 386 credits. Well then, every film fan and his mother has seen Psycho, so get yourself to facebook.com/Diminishing Returns podcast and have a civilised discussion with us. Calvin is ready to defend anything you may want to question. And if you want to see why we keep making jokes about Calvin being obsessed with James Bond, then go to YouTube and search for Calvin Dyson, and you can see the full extent of his infatuation. Join us again next week when we start a run of space-based episodes that will begin with Guardians of the Galaxy.
In the future, if you ever need a podcast, come by. I can't say for sure what you'll find, but it is what makes the world go round.